Hi, and welcome back to the show. This is Joe Rabil with Rabil Stock Research. So in today's video, I am going to start out with a lesson on ADX. I really want to show my two favorite patterns. I'm going to give a quick glimpse of what I'm looking for, and then I'm going to give you a couple examples. So if we get into the agenda, the reason why I like these patterns so much is that I can go through a huge amount of symbols, and I do every week, and basically categorize them into two spots, and they're both based on ADX. And if they're in one position, then I'm looking for certain triggers to take place. If they're in another position, I'm looking for a different type of trigger to take place. And so I want to go through that. I'm just going to give you some examples and a few sample setups. And then we're going to go through the stock requests that came through. So let's go ahead and get into this lesson. If we look at this first graphic, what I've done is on the bottom, I'm showing the higher time frame criteria that I'm looking for. And the low ADX pattern is essentially where we have low ADX below the 25 level for an extended period of time. I prefer to have all three DI lines, all three ADX lines, both DI lines and the ADX below 25, and have the ADX line be below both DI lines for a certain period. But I normally look at it from a price standpoint. I want to see price working sideways and kind of banging its head up against a resistance level. I usually refer to it as a sideways line. And this sideways line is incredibly important, especially if it's been tested more than twice, 2 or 3 times. And if I'm looking at this, let's say on a monthly chart, this could span several years. And so that's the starting point. I'm looking for these basing patterns that have been working sideways. So if we think about stage 4 being the declining phase, stage 1 is a base, right? And I'm looking for where it looks like we're getting to the right side. A late stage 1 base is what I'm looking for. And that's really what ADX can provide you. If you see a low ADX pattern that's been in place for a while, especially where all three of the lines are below 25 for an extended period, then you have this quiet sideways pattern typically, and you can see it in the form of a trend line. And we want to have the consolidation pattern not be too volatile, not be too crazy. That's preferred. Sometimes this will be holding the 18-month, and other times, it could penetrate the 18-month to the downside. But generally speaking, we don't want to look for this pattern when the 18-month is declining. So if I'm looking at this on a monthly chart, I guess is what I'm saying, and I'm looking for this big turnaround to take place, we don't typically want the 18-month to still be declining in this pattern. We want it to at least have flattened out, even though during the pullbacks it might be overrunning a little bit. Generally speaking, we want to see, and it's even preferred if it can hold the 18-month, but as long as it's not declining, I think this pattern is good. So on a weekly chart, we want this exact same pattern. So if we're looking at a weekly and then the lower time frame is a daily, we want this same sideways line taking place where the 18-week is at least flattening out. All right, so that's one. That's the low ADX. And I want to categorize them all in one. So if I go through 3,000 stocks in a week, I'm trying to find, if I can find a handful each week, new stocks that are kind of meeting this criteria, that's great. I'll throw it into a bucket, a watch list bucket, where I'm watching and looking for certain criteria to take place on the lower time frame. On the other higher time signal, that's where we have a strong ADX signal, and the trend is already moving. So if this is an 18-month line, we've made a big move or some kind of a move to the upside, and we've worked our way back towards the 18-month, and the ADX during this move made a peak above, I prefer a peak above 30. In a lot of cases, you'll get a peak above 40 or 50, and then you go through a little bit more of a complex pullback. Now, on the lower time frame, the low ADX breakout, typically you're going to see a low ADX pattern on this time frame to be the trigger to get you in. You don't typically get an ABC decline, an opposing trend type pattern out of a low ADX condition. There are two different types of low ADX breakouts, and I'll show you that in a second. And then we've got the strong ADX. A lot of times we're going to get this ABC pullback, or what I call an opposing trend trigger setup with an 18 and a 40, where the 18 comes down below the 40. And then we're looking for either a trend line break or a move back above both moving averages as a trigger. But there are times where this can be working sideways long enough where it turns into a low ADX condition, and then we're waiting for a breakout. So let me just show you a few examples of this. I've got ADX on the left side, and I've got a monthly on the bottom and a weekly on the top. Now this goes back to 2016. I wanted to give some real good examples. So if you notice, we have a strong ADX condition because we had a move way up here, almost to 50, and during this correction phase, the ADX stayed above 25 even. So that's a really strong ADX condition. And then on the lower time frame, we had this decline phase. We had overrun in MACD, and the ADX actually dropped down and got very low for an extended period. So in this case, I'm drawing a trend line on the lower time frame and looking for a breakout pattern. Now, if you notice, on this breakout, we already had green starting to show decent signs of improvement. So little tiny hitch there. You could have bought the breakout, but the little tiny hitch at the trend line is really probably a little higher pivot low, confirming the DI, green DI is showing strength and a little improvement in the ADX line. Now, on the right side, we've got a strong ADX condition where we pull back to the 18 months, same thing. The difference here is we just get a simple ABC pullback in Microsoft, and that pullback, then you've got a MACD zero line reversal, and you do have low ADX here, so you can draw your trend line. Because the MACD is holding the zero line, unlike here where it clearly overran, and then we knew we were in for a longer period, that's where the low ADX pattern a lot of times will come into play. But if MACD is strong, then what we're looking for is just a simple trend line break or getting back above the moving averages. So those are two different criteria when ADX is strong. Let's look at the lower time frame, the higher time frame where ADX is low. And this goes back to a breakout that took place in early 2014 or 2013 back in NOC. Look at this long sideways line that was created on the monthly chart with low ADX. And then if we go to the weekly, we had a low ADX condition, and then when we broke out, the green ADX, a green line, was already starting to kick in. You see how it crossed, when price crossed above the horizontal line, green DI also did the same, got above 25, showed some strength. So in this case, you can go ahead and just buy the breakout. If we look at the one on the right, we had this break, and if you notice, there's 3 months in here, we broke above this line. But it really wasn't until at the end. So that's coming through this line up here. So we're breaking through, but then we finally got green DI to get going. If you notice down here, there was no sign of green DI back in these breakouts. And in this case, we got the breakout, and then you could have just bought the higher pivot low if you wanted to go ahead and just buy on this breakout. Now, there's nothing wrong with buying here, buying this, with it not really confirming yet, but you have to accept that you got to have a lot of patience. You got to give it more room because it takes a little while to get it going. So if you don't want to miss, you might want to go ahead and take it early and just recognize that you got to give it a little room until the green DI gets going. But those are the two different ways to buy the low ADX breakout. So, when you look at it in these terms, you've got essentially 4 different patterns that can take place. 2 with a strong ADX, and then 2 with a low ADX. And so keep this in mind, categorize your lists. This is really, I'm trying to help my subscribers in a way with this lesson because I send out a lot of stocks that meet these criteria. And this is sort of a little lesson for them and how to use the lists that I send over that actually have a lot of this criteria in place and ready to go. Let's go ahead and get into the analysis now and look at some stocks. Just briefly, my services can be found at rabilstockresearch.com. I analyze the markets, the individual sectors, as well as provide stock ideas. The individual package gets about 2 to 3 reports each week, plus a video. So if you have an interest in trying, you can use a coupon code StockTalk and get the first 2 months for $50. Let's get into the stocks. I'm going to start out with the S&P, and then there were a number of symbols again that came through. One was a late request, but I moved it up. That's Apple, because I want the first two stock requests that came through, I think, are great examples of using the two time frame approach on the ADX that I was just talking about. So I want to start with those. But let's just get going on the S&P. We're in the midst of a rally right now, and it's counter trend to the weekly chart. I mean, we can look at, there's a number of things to look at on the weekly. We've got a declining 18-week and a declining 40. The 18 is below the 40. They're moving down at about the same rate. I mean, typically you would say, hey, that's a pretty strong trend. There are some things that I think are intriguing me, though, and that is that what I've highlighted to my subscribers is that this made a higher bottom and a higher high, the green DI. You see how that made a higher high last week, and this had already made a lower low in the red DI. So when I see that, when I see this is moving this way and this is moving this way, I'm thinking contraction phase is starting. And in this case, a contraction phase would mean a continuation of the rally. Now, what's developing right now is the MACD, which is stretched away from the zero line. Okay, we're getting a crossover right now. It's crossing over its signal line. Again, when it's stretched away from the zero line, that carries a little bit more weight to me. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean we continue to rally to the upside. I think what could happen, there's one of two ways this is going to play out, in my opinion. One is we're going to fail right at this 18, and we're going to get new selling come in, and we're going to have some form of a test of this low. And in the process of doing that, the MACD is going to hold its signal line. It's going to come back and hold the signal line. I guess another version of that would be if we actually went to a new low, came down to the bigger support at 3,500, and maybe this broke through the signal line, but it made a higher low. And then we'd have divergence in place with big support and probably some form of volume climax. So that's a potential. I'm starting to think the higher probability is that we're going to work our way. Now, it might not happen right this second, but work our way through the 18 while this crosses up a little bit more. And then we get some form of a pinch develop with a couple bar pullback as this cups around, the 18-week cups around, and then we get a much better rally up towards the 18-month line. Remember, the 18-month is up here, and it's starting to show signs that it's rolling over, but it hasn't quite done that yet. So when I look at this, and we go and look at the daily chart, what's taking place is a counter trend rally, and you can see that it's counter trend because we don't really have any momentum here, and the MACD is just getting above the zero line. There are signs of improvement here. Notice how green DI came back and pulled back on this last pullback, came back and held to 25 line, and now we're moving back up and we're getting confirmation in green DI of this move. So that increases the likelihood that we want to keep carrying up into this next resistance level. So, I mean, those are all minor positives, but there are signs where we're trying to discern, is this just another rally that's getting ready to get killed, or is this something that could have a little bit more teeth to it? I think ultimately it's going to have more teeth. I don't know if it's going to have right this second. I don't know if we're going to come back, get a little sell signal, because right now we're forming an opposing trend trigger. You see how the 18 is crossing above the 40, prices above, and that's counter to this trend. So we could have a failure right now, have it break the moving averages and get another test of this low or even a minor new low, and that would set up, I think, a much better buying chance. However, we have to accept the possibility that this could just have a continuation to the upside, get through the 18, and then we'd look for the next pullback for a better rally up towards the 18 months. So those are kind of the two scenarios that I'm expecting on the S&P. Let's go ahead and get going on this first symbol. So let's look at what I was talking about in the lesson, which is a strong ADX on the higher time frame monthly, and then we consolidated sideways. During that consolidation, look at how on the weekly chart, we came down, we had massive overrun, okay, and we had low ADX. So in that case, what I want to do is I want to draw the horizontal trend line and look for a breakout, and that's not really a great level here. So I would say right in this level was kind of like the breakout point. Now, this might have been a little early here, but it still, I wouldn't have a problem doing that. You'd have your stop down here. You wouldn't have been taken out or anything. But this is a lot more quality on a closing basis where green is above and kind of holding above. looks pretty good, especially following the pinch play. So we've got, you know, I think what I would consider to be a perfect example of something that I would consider. Now, because it's already moved, you kind of missed that entry. You could wait for a little higher low to develop now as a second entry potential. Now, if we compare that to Apple, Apple has the same qualities with strong ADX on this time frame, and we've pulled back. And then on this time frame, we have overrun. But not only do we have overrun, but we also have strong ADX on the sell side. Do you see how this created a negative ADX peak? So this is a strong ADX peak, and then on the way back down, the sellers were strong enough to get the ADX to cross above 25. Whenever I see that, I am more inclined to give this time. I'm not in a huge hurry, and in fact, what I would probably be waiting for is for green DI to cross above and hold. That would be kind of the signal I would be waiting for. I want a little bit more development in the MACD. I want a double bottom. So if this can push up here and then come back down and make a test, maybe even a 1, 2, 3 in this instance where we have strong ADX to the downside, that's probably more of what I would be looking to do in a stock like Apple versus the GEF, which to me has already triggered, and now we're looking for kind of like a second entry. This one I would give more breathing room and more time. I don't think this can just turn on a dime and take off from here. Okay. PLAB. So the question on this was this last pullback too sharp to play? And in a way it was. I mean, we can see this big red bar. It was a big outside reversal bar. But one thing I want to point out that I think is a factor that should be taken into account is we had a pinch here that followed the pinch here. So we have back-to-back pinch plays. In fact, this has had 2 pinch plays in a row. This was the second one. And this second pullback is giving you another pinch here. So it was kind of, when you have 2 pinch plays back-to-back, in fact, we just created a third right here. So we had a pinch here, pinch right here, pinch right here, and then a pinch right here. So when I see back-to-back pinches, meaning 2 time frame pinch play, I'm inclined to be willing to play it, but I'm going to use the daily chart to make sure that it triggers. So it would have to come back up through 20 to really trigger me in, and then I would probably use a tighter stop off the daily just based on the fact that it was such a sharp sell-off. Okay, so ADI. So there's a couple things going on here, and I want to focus on the monthly chart. The move to the upside did not register that strong of an ADX reading, and that bothers me a little bit. Okay, as I've pointed out, I'm looking for one of 2 things, either a low ADX condition or a strong ADX condition. In this case, I really need a strong ADX condition. Now, on the sell side, this was actually pretty impressive. The sellers are not very strong. So on this side, we don't have strong buying, but on this side, we don't have strong selling. So I'm inclined to think that this has a trading move coming. Like, I don't think this is going to break out above 200, but I could see it going back and testing the prior high just based on the fact that we haven't had strong selling and the ADX could not get above 25 on this last decline. So I'm kind of encouraged by that. So we're probably looking for an entry off the daily chart for a move back up towards resistance. This is very similar to what I talked about in the Qualcomm last week. I view it more like a trading range play as opposed to a trending play, but at the same time, it could be something you could play if you use the daily chart. Okay. Now, StockCharts to me is a rally it's a downtrend that's rallying right now. We're hitting pretty good support though. We came down to this prior area that was kind of where it broke out from, right around the 70 area, and we found support. We're starting to cup around. We're getting back above the 18-week. And that line's starting to flatten out. We've got a little pattern of higher highs and higher lows developed on the daily. So I think what we want to do is make our first test of the declining 18-month. Now, I'm saying this is a counter trend rally to the monthly. Okay, I think we want to carry higher. It might not do it right this second. It might have to check the 18 on a pullback before it goes and tests the 18-month. But I think that's what this wants to do. The MACD has worked its way back down to 0, and that is a reverse divergence. So, you know, it's the type of thing where, yeah, I could see this rallying. You have to be very nimble, though, I think, if you're going to make money in this. Walmart had the violent decline and then the rally back to resistance. I think this looked pretty bad going into the earnings, and I have to say, I mean, it had a big gap down, but the reaction here has been pretty good. This didn't break to a new low. It's kind of forming more of a range pattern, more of a consolidation pattern. I don't think anything's really changed. There's a lot of resistance up here, 135, and there's a decent amount of support around 120 or better. J&J has been a great relative performer. This stock has been moving up all year relative to the market. We can see that in this black line. That's telling you how it's doing. It's basically a relative performance line. The problem is, and you can see it just in the most recent action, it's starting to sell off a little bit. The problem with the stock, though, is that we never had momentum. Okay, we had relative strength, but we had no momentum here, no momentum here, and no momentum here. Okay, so ADX low in all three time frames as you're trying to trend higher is not an ideal situation. It tells me that we got more consolidation coming. I mean, this might even want to test major support at 160. So SQM is the 2 time frame pattern that I was just talking about in the lesson. We have but it's a weekly and a daily, not a monthly and a weekly. Okay, so the weekly chart has strong ADX and has pulled back. Okay, now one thing I want to point out when I see these, I want you to make sure you see this. You see this is a reverse divergence. This is making a lower low. Even though it's a slightly lower low, this is making a significantly higher bottom. All right, so though this has rolled over, and you see how this crossed down below, it's actually crossed down to a degree, to a big enough degree that I actually think it's a bullish sign. So what we're looking for on the daily chart, pullback. You see how when this broke out, so this had low ADX here. All right, so the lower time frame was a low ADX play because we had overrun. The problem is to buy this breakout above this prior high. Look at how many days up in a row you were. I don't buy breakouts when you're extended. So what we want to do from here is look for a higher low and maybe coming back up like that. That would be what I'd be looking for on this. But treat it as a weekly daily pattern, not a monthly weekly. Okay, so DHI, so a couple things going on. Number one, and you always want to do this. This is why I love having the monthly chart and the weekly chart up together. You see this? Look at this price support. You see how we came down to major price support? That was the breakout from this monthly chart. That's really important to recognize. And then you had a little mini divergence here. You see how MACD made a higher low and this made a lower low? So then we're on the lookout for, this basically a king-queen, where we have a big down bar as queen and then an up bar as a king. So we got a reversal, a bull 180 basically, big down bar, big up bar. Coming back up through those two bars would be like a little mini buy signal on the divergence. Now, I mean, I'm not saying that this has a lot of upside to it. All right, but this might want to work its way back up towards the 18-month because we're above the 18-week and we have a rising 18-day. We don't have enough momentum to consider this a really strong trend. Recognize what's going on the daily momentum, the daily ADX, and that'll tell us which stocks are really the strong ones and which ones are probably just rallies. Now, wire, I really like this pattern. Okay, there's a couple things. Number one, we had really big move to the upside and we come back. We have the strong ADX condition. Okay, now on this one, let's just look at this because this is a key thing. We had a pullback and it really didn't make a lower low, but MACD was holding the zero line. So I could see someone wanting to play this downtrend line break, right? This buy here. All right, now it went up and then it immediately kind of cracked down. You'd have been stopped out. You'd have lost money in that trade. I like to draw trend lines only when this makes a lower low, but I can see how, based on how good of a drop that made, that you would have wanted to draw that trend line. And just based on the whole pattern, we had low ADX. I mean, that was good enough to want to try and play it. And then, we're subject to a bear market. It's a tough environment. Now, the point I want to make, though, is if you've got stopped out and this didn't go to a new low, we're still in the same position. But what I don't want to do is keep taking trades inside this range, because I don't want to take two losses in the same pattern. I don't want to get stopped out here and then stopped out again. So I'm not taking this 40 cross, okay? This might look okay, but I'm waiting for this to get back up through this key trend line now. I want to see it get through that. If it gets through that, then I'm willing to play this monthly consolidation. It's a tough pattern because it's so wide. The swings are so big and wide. So just a tough one there, unfortunately. But the bigger picture on this is actually pretty good. Let's try and get one more stock in. Now, this is where it's just tough. We're trying to turn a stock, holding the 18-week. Look at what's happened here today. This is just a classic environment where, you know, it kind of wakes you up and says, yeah, we had a couple good days in here. Yesterday was a huge up day. But the reality is we have a lot of stocks that are going to take a long time to cup around and improve. And yeah, you can try and play these for little rallies and moves like that, but you got to be very careful, especially around earnings. Okay, well, thanks for joining me. Please feel free to reach out. My contact information is listed. If you have any stock requests, send it to stocktalk@stockcharts.com. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.
Hey guys, Dave Keller here with StockCharts.com. Thanks so much for watching our video. If you enjoyed it, and we hope you did, hit the like button right below. Also, we have so much new content every day. Consider subscribing to the channel. Just hit the subscribe button in the video or right below. Thanks for watching. Stay safe. Have a fantastic day.